George Soros is obviously the boogeyman in American conservative circles. Now, what they like to paint this Jewish billionaire as is someone who goes around giving money to subversive groups in America to try and, I guess, bring about the end of people like Donald Trump, bring about the end of American values, and all that, sort of rubbish. And it used to be a sort of fringe conspiracy theory, but now, thanks to people like Donald Trump and Candace Owens and numerous conservative commentators, it's become very, very mainstream. Now, in this video, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down who George Soros is. I'm going to break down what these types of conspiracy theories are. I'm going to talk about how it's become mainstream, and I'm going to talk about the consequences of this conspiracy theory becoming mainstream. So George Soros grew up in Hungary in the 1930s and the 1940s. He was a child when the Nazis invaded Hungary and started their programs against the Jews. Now, Soros survived the war by pretending he was Christian, and he was actually adopted by a Christian family for a part of it, and he was president in Hungary when the Soviets liberated it. In 1947, he moved to England to pursue his studies in economics and philosophy. And it's from here he began to develop the understanding of these things to help formulate his billions and billions of wealth that he would eventually accumulate through decades and decades of him working in banking, hedge funds, and the stock market. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend I feel like billionaires are good people or George Soros is a necessarily good person for having so much wealth. He does comparatively give away a lot of his wealth, but again, the idea of a billionaire existing in a moral society just doesn't sit right with me. A lot of the controversy around Soros has also come from him, I guess, betting against currency during tumultuous times. He made a lot of money in 1992 when the markets crashed in Britain because he betted against the pound, and it's something he has done in numerous countries. And the part of the conspiracy theory comes into this is that he's been accused by multiple people of actually funding societal unrest to tank economies so he can profit by betting against that country's currency. So keep that in mind, but I'm going to go into the main thing conspiracy theories talk about. So he has an organisation called the Open Society, which was established in 1979, and it now operates in more than 120 countries. So the first conspiracy theory about Soros appeared in the early 1990s, but a lot of them really gained traction during the 2003 Iraq War, when he started donating to the Democratic Party in America. And he really has given a lot to the Democrats. I think it's estimated he's given over $100 million in campaign donations or setting up super PACs. So this guy clearly does like the Democratic Party. But again, on the surface, this guy isn't too different to many so-called liberal billionaires. He funds political candidates he likes. His philanthropy work targets things like poverty and education. And a lot of the work he has done seems to go against the accusations that are made against him of him being a leftist and funding left-wing causes. He actually spent a ton of money to undermine the socialist countries during the Cold War and really help the dissident groups there. He is obviously also a capitalist and funds capitalist candidates, and it's kind of hard to see how a guy who is such a capitalist can be a leftist. So we haven't touched on how this is anti-Semitic, but I want to go through the conspiracy theories first, then get into the history of anti-Semitism around these theories, and then we will get to the violent ends that these theories often create. So this is quite topical, but numerous right-wing pundits and activists are now alleging that Soros is funding the protests following the murder of George Floyd. So people like Candace Owens have said that, as he did with Antifa, Democrat George Soros has these thugs on a payroll. He is funding the chaos via his Open Society Foundation. Another conservative, Deanna Lorraine, who was a Republican candidate for Congress who ran unsuccessfully against Nancy Pelosi in March 2020, said to her followers, "Bring attention to this very organised takeover of the country by getting Sorosgate and Soros trending on Twitter." So you're starting to get a flavour here. George Soros is the big boogeyman. He is funding Antifa. He has them on a massive payroll to undermine America. So how has this become mainstream? Obviously we have people like Candace Owens, who sadly is in the mainstream now. People like this Republican candidate for Congress. But of course, Donald Trump himself has also spoke about these things. So there were protests at the Kavanaugh hearing, and Donald Trump tweeted back in October 2018, "The very rude elevator screamers are paid professionals only looking to make senators look bad. Don't fall for it. Also look at all of the professionally made identical signs paid for by Soros and others. These are not signs made in a basement from love. Hashtag troublemakers." Now let's not also forget Trump also suggested, and many Republicans and conservatives suggested, that Soros was himself funding the migrant caravan from Honduras to assault the US border and flood the country with refugees and migrants. So we've spoken about the conspiracy theories. It's basically not too hard to understand. Everything to do with so-called left-wing politics, even though it's mainly liberal politics, is controlled by Soros. People call him the puppet master. And let's get into how this is all anti-Semitic. So we're going to be talking about cultural Bolshevism and cultural Marxism. These beliefs that Jews are behind left-wing plots, including socialist and communist movements, to undermine Western society, Western values, but they're also a front for the Jews and the Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. Now, I actually made a video about Jordan Peterson and cultural Marxism, and I gave quite a detailed explanation of the history of these things. So what I'm going to do is just use that again here, because I'm not going to say it any better than I did there. So this is how cultural Marxism and cultural Bolshevism are extremely anti-Semitic. Talking about all this Nazi stuff, let's talk about cultural Marxism's links to the Nazis. So it starts with cultural Bolshevism. So in the wake of the 1917 Russian Revolution, conspiracy started flying around that it was orchestrated by the Jews, and it was a part of a worldwide Jewish conspiracy to take power in Europe. But it also expanded outside of Europe, and part of the conspiracy was that the Jews were behind all communist movements in the world. They just wanted to use these movements to take power for themselves. Now, this was brought into the mainstream when in 1919 the book was published, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, this book was in part funded by Henry Ford, obviously a massive Nazi sympathizer, and he made sure this book was brought over to the US and widely circulated. It also became a key textbook for children being educated in Nazi Germany. So in Russia before the revolution, a lot of Jewish people did support more socially progressive policies because the Tsarist regime was so awful to the Jews, and obviously throughout the history had done numerous pogroms against the Jews. So when the whites fled to the west, they fled to Germany, they fled to England, because there were some Jewish members of the Bolsheviks, they said it must be the Jews who have orchestrated this whole thing. And another reason the Jewish conspiracy became so normalised was because white royals and white aristocrats went around Europe saying, look at all the Jews who ran the Bolsheviks, look what they've done to the country, it's obviously a Jewish conspiracy, and plays into historic anti-Semitism that European Christians have had against Jews pretty much since the Romans adopted Christianity. So this is how anti-Semitism became a key part of anti-leftism. Hitler would say in the 1920s that a main part of the Nazis' ideology was to destroy Jewish Bolshevism, and most people who were anti-left were anti-Semitic because it got so muddied by these conspiracy theories. So in a lot of Nazis and just general conservative views at the time after the Russian Revolution, they believed any people pushing for progressive social change are part of this Jewish conspiracy. They are obviously controlled by the international cabal of Jews, wherever they may be, and we gotta fight it no matter what. And that's why a lot of people became so anti-Semitic in this time. So this is cultural Bolshevism. It is similar to cultural Marxism, but it's not exactly the same. Cultural Marxism has its origins in the 1930s and is a bit different. But cultural Marxism is still wildly anti-Semitic. It basically believed that in the 1930s, the Jewish Marxist philosophers of the Frankfurt School, by pushing their views for progressive change in terms of sexual liberalization or accepting different races, they were actually trying to destroy American values. And it linked into what people thought about cultural Bolshevism. It's that the Jews are everywhere trying to destroy Western society. So people on the far right like William Lind and Holocaust denier Kevin MacDonald basically say that cultural Marxism is the root of all political correctness. That the historical efforts by academics and activists to push progressive policies and advance social change is actually part of a Jewish conspiracy aimed at destroying the West. So you can see through what I was talking about how this colours the George Soros conspiracy theories. Again, he is a left-wing puppet master who funds numerous unrelated things. Migrant caravans coming to the US, protests against Kavanaugh, the George Floyd protests, anti-police protests. Soros is behind all of it because he's pushing these elements of social change to undermine the fabric of America, undermine the Christian conservative fabric of America so he can gain more power and the Jewish conspiracy can take over the world. Now you can see why it's so troubling that people talk about Soros in this way, because it really is playing into fascist propaganda. Regardless if you're a Nazi, regardless if you're a knowing anti-Semite, even though I'd argue if you're pushing this stuff you probably are an anti-Semite, it's clear this is very, very helpful for Nazi movements at large. And it's not surprising with people like the president talking about this Soros conspiracy that white nationalism, especially in America, but not limited to America, has seen a massive resurgence. Now, this isn't just shit posters and trolls online, this has real world consequences, which I'm going to talk about now. So let's talk about how Trump normalising this conspiracy theory inspired violence. So the BBC did a good article where they talk about this conspiracy theory, so I'm just going to read some of it now. So the migrant caravan was filmed throughout its entire journey. Local charities were seen helping the migrants, but there's no evidence of Soros funding at any point. On the 27th of October 2018, 11 days after the first conspiracy theory surfaced about the migrant caravan, and 5 days after the pipe bomb was delivered to Soros' house, a white man armed with an assault rifle and 3 handguns walked into a synagogue in Pittsburgh and he murdered 11 Jews. It was the worst act of anti-Semitic violence in US history and was carried out by a man obsessed with George Soros. The social media post of the gunman, Robert Bowers, revealed he believed in a dark anti-Semitic conspiracy theory called white genocide with Soros as the mastermind. The theory claims white people are being replaced by immigrants and will ultimately be eliminated, and this helps explain the neo-Nazi chants "Jews will not replace us," which they chanted as they marched through Charlottesville. So you see the real world consequences of that, and this conspiracy theory about Soros does colour events like the Pittsburgh synagogue massacre, events like Charlottesville, events like those pipe bombs being sent to Soros and the Democratic leadership, because it plays into classic anti-Semitic tropes, you know, pushed by the Nazis and the Elders of Zion, pushed by people who talk about cultural Marxism, pushed by modern day white supremacists. And why I get so mad about people talking about cultural Marxism in a modern day context, whether that's Jordan Peterson or Boris Johnson, is because cultural Marxism just helps normalise fascist propaganda. Now, where Jordan Peterson and Boris Johnson talk about cultural Marxism in the sense that the Marxists have infiltrated the universities because they lost the Cold War to essentially brainwash your children into a progressive mindset which will undermine Western society. And in people like Jordan Peterson's perspective, this will inevitably lead to authoritarianism. What people like Boris Johnson and Peterson don't realise is that they're pushing a conspiracy theory that can easily be added onto by Nazis. So where they say the Marxists have infiltrated the universities, all the Nazis have to say is, yeah, you see what Jordan Peterson says, that's true, but the Marxists are actually being paid by the Jews, and it's part of a Jewish plot to take over the world. See, it's not hard to get from Jordan Peterson's view on cultural Marxism to a Nazi view on cultural Marxism, and a Nazi view of Jews in general. So whether knowingly or not, people who talk about George Soros in this way are helping normalise Nazism, white supremacy and general fascist ideologies. And again, to make it clear, I don't like someone like George Soros, I don't like billionaires, I don't like people giving obscene amount of money to different political parties. I don't like someone who makes their money betting against the economy collapsing. But again, you have to be totally insane to think what he's doing with his money is funding things like migrant caravans, which only exist because of the US's own imperialism in Central and South America, which causes thousands of refugees to flee their countries. It's not too hard to understand that. It doesn't have to be some big boogeyman paying them loads of money. And of course, this whole recent thing about Antifa being funded by Soros is basically the same stuff that was pushed in the 1930s. Socialists are paid by the Jewish conspiracy to undermine Western democracy, the same way people like Trump and conservatives today are saying Antifa, communist leftist Antifa, are paid by a Jewish billionaire who survived the Holocaust to undermine conservative Western American values. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please leave a like if you liked it. Please share if you want to spread the message of how ridiculous a conspiracy theory is and how it plays into general fascism. Follow me on social media at The Tabernacle, mainly on Twitter, that is the big one for me, but also Instagram and also Facebook. Please check out my Reddit, that is another very, very important one for my channel. So r/The Tabernacle, that is my subreddit, and u/Tommy Cahill 1995, that is my personal personal Reddit, feel free to personal message me or chat to me on there. I'm pretty active, so I normally reply to most of my messages. If you're feeling generous, please check out my Patreon in the description. Maybe check out my WordPress to see some of my written work. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.